Without further ado, I would like to hand over now to our keynote speaker, Kevin Hyland. Kevin, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Ambassador Vuthi, for inviting me and for allowing me to participate in this event with fellow panelists. The term human trafficking is often misused and misunderstood, conflated with smuggling or other events, and viewed in many cases as inevitable when there are things including vulnerability, such as where there is poverty, climate displacement, gender inequality, corruption, and many other causes. But what needs to be remembered and reinforced is that human trafficking is a serious crime and is never inevitable. It's where vulnerability is preyed upon in the vast majority of cases to make money. The most recent figures disclose that almost 50 million people worldwide are exploited in human trafficking and modern slavery, generating an income of $236 billion in illicit gains every year. This means that this is the second most lucrative crime on the planet, running behind drugs, but way ahead of the 120 billion earned in the illegal dealing in weapons and firearms. So when we speak of this, we must remember what it is. And one area where trafficking has been present for many years, but is rarely spoken of, is here in the issue of sport. Sport, as we know, is associated with achievement, with exceptionalism, and is aligned to patriotism, or a country, or perhaps a team or region. It is often a way that people remove themselves from vulnerability. But even when they try to do that, it is preyed upon, I specifically say, by criminals. In recent decades, it has also become associated with wealth. Sport is sponsored by big business and having influence to shape political thinking. For example, some brands associated to sport can use that wealth and that influence to actually influence broadcasting rights or community infrastructures. And they may want to associate themselves with a political leader or a particular political stance. We do also see that sports and sports personalities have used their influence for very good purposes. For example, Manchester United Marcus Rashford's school dinners campaign has received many accolades and brought a U-turn on much condemned government policy. But sport has become synonymous with money. That is something that has made it attractive and seen as a good way for criminals to infiltrate it, with particularly when we talk about human trafficking, low levels of risk. And of course, these criminals don't just seek this out in sport, they seek it out wherever it is, in supply chains, in vulnerable communities, and in many forms, including in the sale of organs from young children who are in very vulnerable situations, as we see in Afghanistan. So how do we turn this? How do we change this system? Well, we need to see this for what it is. And we need to, as we'll hear from FIFA, developing processes that integrate safeguarding into every element of their business. How do we actually address this? It has to be through prevention. Little is done on prevention. Yes, of course, when it happens, there should be sanction. There should be outcomes that are negative to the traffickers, to the business, to those who profit. But prevention is far better. I have personally met boys from Africa who, when I met them in southern Italy, had arrived expecting to join some of the best football teams in Europe. Despite crossing the Mediterranean in a dangerous boat, being accommodated in poor conditions in a camp in southern Italy, they still argued with me that their need to get to meet their agent at Termini station in Rome was so important to them. They had been brainwashed into believing that the opportunity for them was greater than any risk. And someone like me was only somebody who was trying to prevent them from reaching their dream, perhaps thinking I might be jealous, perhaps thinking that we didn't want to welcome them into Europe. And of course, what was known is those boys, when they reached Termini station in Rome, would not be meeting with the football team or anything to do with that, but were being entered into paedophile markets that were operating across Europe. But we must remember it's not limited to football, it's across many sports, and we will hear about that when we have the presentation by Michael Lander. It shows how his talent became the means to exploitation. And it goes beyond the participants. It goes beyond the people in sport. As we see with Michael's case, it was those who were surrounding him who were saying they were going to represent him legally and as agents in his promotion. But also, when we look at official merchandise, when we look at merchandise for big Olympic sports or football sports or the Super Bowl, where are they made? And there's been many disclosures where they have been made at the hands of children in forced labour and those who are being exploited. In 2012, I led on the human trafficking elements of the Metropolitan Police in London. And at the outset, we started planning for that at least 2 years beforehand. We got involved in prevention around the construction industry. Many simple things were brought in about checking the qualifications of the workers, about accommodation, about what the merchandise that would be sold, and identifying the risks and building policies to mitigate them in consultation with what's called LOCOG, which was the Olympic Committee, and the London Mayor's Office, which fed into central government. And then during the Paralympics and the Olympics, there were measures put in place, particularly to protect women who were seen to perhaps work in sexual exploitation, in prostitution, in the region and the area where the Games was being held, an area well known for women working in prostitution. And the policy I brought in was that women would not be arrested during that period for working in prostitution. They would be supported. And that support was put together by religious sisters, by the National Health Service, by volunteers, and by the Metropolitan Police, collectively funded by the Metropolitan Police. And during that period, we actually saw a reduction in trafficking and exploitation, and there was very little, if any, women who were exploited on the streets of London. But we need to make sure that when we are planning for these big sporting events, that we are looking at the workers' conditions leading up to the Olympic events or any other world sport. We need to have policies on merchandise. We need to have local police and security services aware and checking the risks. We need to include airlines in what the risks are. We need to include transport systems. So it's across government. And of course, if it does go wrong, we need to make sure that we have safeguarding in place so that people are protected and are not further prosecuted or persecuted. Recently, I've looked at modern slavery statements or commitments by some of the leading sports clubs in the United Kingdom required under the Modern Slavery Act and in Australia. Their ambition to address their sports and the ambition to succeed in all they do isn't replicated in their statements. Many of them read, "We do not manufacture or produce goods," as if this mitigates them from what happens elsewhere in their supply chains. And of course, the new EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which will affect companies trading on over 450 million with 1,000 employees, will have impact for many of those organisations. So we need to see that over the next few years as they are rolled out, these statements are effective, real, and prevent the issue of human trafficking and modern slavery. An organisation that I'm working with closely now is the G20, to see how we can upscale the presence of prevention in this crime. For example, many of the operations, when I look at the Super Bowl, are about during the event, not leading up to it. And it's all about responses when it happens, as opposed to the planning for the 12 months, 24 months ahead of it. With a small amount of investment by the sports leaders in that field, for example, a lot of prevention can happen, will have impact, not just in their own sport, but also in the community. When I look at this issue of human trafficking and modern slavery, I think about the many different people I've met all around the world. I think about boys that I've met in Nigeria who told me about their promises to go to the land of the UK to play for some of the best Premier League teams. I think about the boys I met in southern Italy who were promised that they were going to play for some of the biggest teams in Europe. I also think about people who have no hope or believe they have no hope in parts of the world where we can have influence. For example, with the G20, the $870 billion US every year in remittances that has money stolen from it, that is a large sum of money that could build communities so that people, migrants who are going elsewhere to work, if their money was sent home to their families, they would have an opportunity. And if we made sure that legally, companies and governments in particular had to be accountable for their supply chains. 1 in every $5 spent in the world is by a government. Nobody has mandated a government to spend that money where it ends up with criminals in supply chains, and sadly, including supply chains that are related to sports and its industries and its suppliers. So, sport is about doing as best you can, whether you are at local level or whether you're at the international level. We all like to see people succeed. We all like to see the person who may not be able to do a sport very well do their best. We see the way sport has developed in the country where I live, in Ireland. The way it now includes women and girls in its sport is remarkable from perhaps 2 decades ago. We see the way the Paralympics has become as much followed as the Olympics. And we see the people who win those medals recognised in every way, shape and form as the people who win the gold medals in other sports. So let's make sport something that can change the agenda. Let's make sport where it is something where winning is really important, but winning is much bigger than just being on the field. That winning means that our games and our events and our focus and the finances it generates are not tainted with abuse, are not tainted with the fact that 22,000 children every year die in forced labour and exploitation. The fact that 50 million people are suffering at this time, and the fact that 236 billion in criminal assets is floating around, some of it within the sports industry. So I think the sports organisations can actually play a major role in ending this scourge of human trafficking and modern slavery that blights our world. Thank you very much.
My name is Jamie Leitner. I'm currently a student at the University of London for Human Rights Masters. My background is compliance and business ethics for corporations. I also have a postgrad in football business. And the theme I come across working with corporations is a lot like what Mr. Hyland referenced, which is we have our Modern Slavery Act. What they write isn't necessarily always what they do. The biggest gap I've found is follow-up and follow-through to ensure accountability is met. So from the sports industry perspective, both for Mr. Hyland and maybe Ms. Leslie, you have 211 members, and then of course the state's responsibility for ensuring compliance with forward to ensure compliance with the associations who are responsible for sports in general.
So thank you. I think that part of that is under review with the new legislations that we're seeing coming out, because it does impact on, big business. Okay, in the EU it's going to be 450 million and 1,000 employees, but that will cover most of the big football federations and also FIFA and some of the other organisations that will have to do a meaningful statement that will have to show up and down. And so that means that what they write, they have to be able to stand over and have to be able to show that it's right. And then, of course, with more legislation like Canada, with Australia, with its and the ASEAN Federation looking at new legislation, I think, as we've heard with FIFA, there is a change. As we know, things are slow. But I think, with the US using more the Customs and Border Protection, let's see how that's used against the World Cup, and particularly in franchises and organisations, particularly importing stuff. When we're using all those properly, and bearing in mind we're still not using the ILO Forced Labour Protocol from 1930 properly, we need to focus in on those instruments, make sure they're properly understood, properly implemented, properly enforced, and I think we're starting to see the shoots of that, particularly with the EU legislation.